Let's talk about the paint bucket tool. Now you may be wondering why we have this coloring book for the paint bucket tool. And actually, this makes a really cool example for using the paint bucket tool. Sure, you can fill a layer with a paint bucket tool or a selected area, but little did you know that the distant cousin of the paint bucket tool is the magic wand tool. Magic wand tool, you say? Absolutely. And the cool things that we can do with the magic wand tool, where we can automatically select certain areas and then be able to fill that selected area, the paint bucket tool will do in one click. So we're going to jump over to the paint bucket tool, which is the letter G. It is nested in with your gradient and your 3D material drop tool. And when we grab the paint bucket tool here, let's go up to our options bar and set the options. First of all, we want to make sure we're filling with the foreground color, and the foreground color is what's going to be in our toolbar here. Whatever color we pick, that's our foreground color. We definitely want the mode to be normal and the opacity to be 100%. Now the tolerance here is the tolerance that when you click on an area, say this white area here, the tolerance being a low number, it will have very low tolerance for any other pixels that are not like itself. Just like the magic wand tool, the tolerance goes up to 255. So here, because we've got a white background that we're going to want to fill those areas in, we don't need the tolerance very high. 20 is really good. Want anti-alias checked. That's going to give us smoother looking fills at the edges. And we definitely want contiguous checked, because contiguous is going to be all of the pixels that are touching. If you don't have contiguous checked and you click on something, it's just going to fill everything that contains that area that you clicked on. Also going to call up our swatches panel, and that you're going to find under your window menu, under swatches. Now your swatches panel may have some colors in it, may not have a lot. They've also, in this version of Photoshop, they've broken this down into different sections where you have to open the little twirlies in the folders to get to the content. Now you can always go into the cheese grater in your swatches panel here, and you can import swatches from other locations. You can restore the defaults back to its limited set, or you can load the legacy swatches, which I have done here. The legacy swatches give you swatches from previous versions of Photoshop, which is one of the reasons why I have quite the plethora of color here in my swatches to pick from. Now the swatches panel is great. This allows me to get in here and simply jump in and click on my colors. You'll notice I've loaded all of my Pantone colors in here as well. It just gives me a broader range of colors. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off, I'm just going to take my paint bucket tool, I'm going to click in here on a color, and when I choose a color, it's going to put it up here in my recent color section right here. Now it changes over to the eyedropper tool when we're in this panel. That's just something that it automatically does. Now, coming over to our screen, we're going to click on an area that I'd like to fill with that chosen color. Boom, fills the whole thing. And you'll notice it fills everything in because I've got the contiguous checked, and I clicked on those white pixels, and in that area it was contiguous, and so it filled those areas. Now I'm going to jump in, and I'm going to pick a green here, and I'm going to hit some green blue, and come back and grab another green here for the trees, and just kind of touch those trees as well, and begin to fill these areas pretty easily. Okay, picking different greens and so on as we go, because I like variety. All right. So we got those trees filled in here. Maybe you've missed a few, but we got time. I'm going to go back in here and kind of hit a few colors on the windows here and fill those in as well. I'm going to come in and get some dark green grass right here. Boom. Ooh, look at that. Now, what happened here is, I'm going to zoom in on this. You'll notice that this little area wasn't filled right here. So, of course, all the pixels were contiguous here. This is fairly easy. We can just go in and we could paint that over with some type of divider so that doesn't fill that tree there. You can still do that at any time, and we'll show you how that's going to happen. Now as you go through, just simply pick some colors and have some fun filling in all of these beautiful houses. Where that historic place is in San Francisco. No, I don't know the name, but everybody knows the picture. So you can have a lot of fun with this, just simply clicking on all these areas and making all this stuff be filled with color. Boom. A lot of people are like, oh my gosh, I could do this forever. You could. I mean, you can just download anything online. I just look for coloring books online, and you just find hundreds, if not thousands, of these that somebody has just scanned in or created. And it's a great little practice that you can go in and just simply click on this. One thing that you do have to be careful of when you go in, make sure you don't click on any of the black lines, because then the black lines will actually be filled, unless that's what you want. Because, of course, it's all a matter of going in and clicking on something and having it choose and then fill that color with wherever you click. So just be a little bit careful when you're going in there and doing that so that you don't get those areas that you don't want to fill. Now, the interesting thing with this is that this has all been done on one layer. And this really isn't what you want to do, okay? Because the problem is if you have an issue, you have to go back now and you have to undo everything if I wanted to, say, undo this tree. Now, there is an interesting feature here. And if I go over to my eraser tool, and I grab my eraser tool, we do have this thing called Erase to History. And Erase to History is kind of interesting. The Erase to History allows me to go in and erase back in time. Well, what does that actually mean? Well, let's go to our History panel and check this out. Our Erase to History is going to erase back to where we set the point in history. Now, I haven't set a point in history yet, so the default point in history is going to be the file when you opened it, which is right here. You can see at the very top. If I grab my eraser tool, and I'm going to right-click on my eraser tool to call up my brushes, because the brush eraser is a brush, and I'm going to call up an eraser. And if you choose the Erase to History button here, and I would like to erase something like this, I could go in and I could simply erase this area, and it's like, oh my gosh, it's magic. It's not like erasing my image, it's only erasing what I've done. You know, how does that happen? Well, what it's doing is it's going right back to the history. And you can see here in the history panel, I've done all my paint buckets. And then this little history eraser here allows me to go back. So this is kind of like a setup where it allows you to revert your file back, but we're not actually reverting the entire file, okay? So while this is really cool, unfortunately, it's one of these things that it's destructive that we paint directly on here, and it's also destructive that we erase back to history. And some people may say, well, yeah, but if we erase back to history, I haven't touched anything. The problem is we painted directly on this image. So I want to revert back to my original image, and I can do that in a couple of ways. I can go into my history panel, click back on my original image, which is going to be the same thing as going to the File menu and choosing Revert. Choosing Revert here, or clicking on my cityscape up here at the top, will bring me back to my original image. I want to paint non-destructively. I want to paint so that I don't have to worry about harming any of my original image. So in my Layers panel, come down to the bottom and click on the New Layer button next to the trash can. And this is going to be my painting layer. I'm just going to double click on the name it, and hit Return. Now I'm going to paint directly on this layer with the Paint Bucket tool. So I'm going to go back to G right here. And if I then choose a color, I can then go in and I can simply click on this layer and it fills the entire layer. And it's like, well, wait a second. Okay, I thought this was going to be cool and non-destructive. Well, it will be. One of the things that you can do when you have a layer, if you just want to fill it with a color, just take your Paint Bucket tool and click on the layer. But in this case, I still want the outlines of these to be my buffer zone so that it pays attention to those areas, even though I've got a totally separate layer. So up in the options bar, with the Paint Bucket tool, I am going to choose All Layers. And this is kind of a short little version of saying, I want you to pay attention to all the layers and all the boundaries of all the layers, but when we paint, we're just going to put this on its own blank layer, paying attention to everything down below. So now if I fill the sky with that color, awesome. If I then hit the windows, it fills all this in, and I'm going to go in and I'm going to grab some green here, and maybe throw some green in for the trees too, just to fill this in a little bit So we can see, gotta have orange, my favorite color, and I plunk this into those areas and fill it all in. Wonderful. Okay. Oh, let's add just a few more things here just because we can. Now, over in the Layers panel, I'm going to poke the background in the eye. Look at that. There's my entire painting without the structure. I turn off my painting layer, and I can see that. What are the advantages of this? Well, the advantages of this are I can go in, and if I didn't like something that I've done here on my painting layer, I could grab my eraser, and here is not the time you want to erase to history, because if you do erase to history, and it does work, which it won't because we've created layers, and a layer was not when we opened up the file, a layer didn't exist. But I couldn't erase to history. If I could, what would happen, it was to take my outline drawing here and erase it, basically put it onto my painting layer. Don't want to do that, so I don't want to erase to history. But I could use my eraser tool in here, and I could also just go in and just select an area, because I'm just on my painting layer here. Okay, this background layer has nothing to do with it. I could just select and delete something, and then of course turn my selection off if I didn't like something. So this works pretty well. So as I go through, I start throwing in some more color here, having a little bit more fun. Do some blue trees. Why not? You know, this is the artist's rendering of what I think this should look like. It's fun, it's crazy, and I like it. So as we go through, you can see that we've got more and more content going on. Now, there's a couple things that I'd like to do about picking color. You'll notice that as you come through here, we have all of our most recent colors. These recent colors are very easy for us to go back in time and choose, but the problem is I may have been 20, 30, 40 colors into my painting here, and I can't remember what color this blue was. You know, was it this blue? Was it this blue? Don't worry about it. As you're using the Paint Bucket tool, if you hold down the Option or the Alt key, you'll be able to go back and sample another color that you've already used. You get what's called the sampling ring. And the sampling ring shows you the previous color that we were painting with on the bottom of the ring, and then it shows you the color you just sampled on the top of your ring. That color that you've sampled now appears in your swatch panel for you to use again, like so, which makes it really nice. So while these swatches are nice to have the recent ones there, I may have too many to go ahead and choose from. So, you know, maybe I want this lighter blue again. I'm just going to Option or Alt click, pick that lighter blue, to then go in and do my windows with that lighter blue. Now, I want to show you a couple tricks on how to get lighter and darker versions of a color. I'm going to zoom in to this roof right here, and I'm going to pick a medium red. I'm going to come in and I'm going to throw some red in the middle of the shingles here, like so. Now I would like to go ahead and do darker red on this side and a little bit lighter red, but I want to stay in this family here. So I could go into my swatches panel and kind of pick on both sides here. And remember, my swatches panel has a huge amount of swatches in here. Yours probably doesn't, so being able to use this range that I have here probably isn't going to work the same for you. So I have a shortcut that I use all the time, and it's this. Once I've chosen my color and I've applied it, I'm going to go over to my color picker in my toolbar and I'm going to click. Now, if I want a darker version of the color, I'm not going to try to click all around here and, try to find that color because I'm all over the place. So, cool other little trick too, folks. If you hold down your Option or Alt key, that cancel button turns into reset, so you get back to where you were without closing out of the dialog box. If I go to my hue, saturation, and brightness radio buttons, I'm going to click on my brightness radio button. This allows me to take my sliders and darken that original image. My current image, or my current color, I should say, is this medium. The new one is the darker one, and I've kept it right in the exact same family, just by using the brightness. Okay, and I've just done my brightness slider to make it less bright. I click OK. Now I have a darker version of this that I'm just going to come in and I'm going to hit the side of this on. Going to go back into my color picker again and go even darker, just to do these last little bits. It creates a really nice tonal range. I'm going to hold down my Option or Alt key, sample back at my original color, go back into my color picker, and I'm going to brighten this up. Now you notice I don't have much range in this particular choice of color, so now I'm going to click on my saturation button to go ahead and lighten this further, keeping it all in the exact same family. So now I go back in and I lighten this all up right there, looking good. Maybe if I want to go a little bit lighter here, I can, and lighten this up even further. And this has given me a really quick, yet easy and efficient way to go ahead and create kind of like a highlight shadow effect here on my painting. Without having to choose from a list of pre-made standard colors, I can very easily go in and just pick another color. Say I want to make these windows a little bit darker, Option or Alt click, sample the color, click my brightness button, darken that up a bit, go back in, boom, 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 just like that. And you do have to say boom, boom, boom. It's required. Okay? That's how you do it. So choosing these colors is great. Now, I could put any of these colors that I use into my swatches panel for future use. I don't usually do that simply because if I've got my palette, which is here with what I'm working with on screen here, I have the ability to go in and just Option or Alt click and sample, and I'm good. But if you did want to choose a color, and you really like this color, you can always come into your swatches panel here, and let me close this stuff up so we have the room. And you can add a swatch to the panel here. If you go in, and we got to have enough room here. My swatch panel is huge with there. But if I did want to add a color in here, I could go into my swatches panel, and I could go in and just say, okay, let's just do a new swatch preset, and whatever color you have in your color picker, it'll just put right in, and you can add this to your Creative Cloud library to use in other Adobe applications. In this case, I don't need to. I click OK, and it's going to put it in basically where it thinks it belongs. Now, when you have this many colors in your swatch panel, trying to find that color that you created really doesn't make a lot of sense, but you can do that just in case you need that. So, that's how we can run with this. Now, I do want to show you something else here. This is something a little bit different. Remember that I don't have to paint with a paint bucket tool in any given opacity, okay? So I've been painting at 100% opacity, but what happens if I set the opacity, say, down to 60? Now I'm just going to use my color picker by clicking on my toolbar here just to sample a color, okay? A lot of people like this because it gives you the full spectrum of color that you can choose from and don't have to go into your pre-made swatches. If I click OK and I add this color in here, it's just going to give me a color that is 60% opacity. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means that when we paint, we have kind of like this translucent effect here. You don't really see it because it's on a white background. But this is another trick that you can do if you wanted to go in and you wanted to darken or lighten a color here. So say I've got my windows and I'd like to go ahead and just add a slightly different color to them. Rather than just changing the color completely, like Option Alt click here and then going in saying, okay, I'd like a darker blue, maybe I'd like to go ahead and just throw a little bit different color on top. Maybe I want to put a little bit of yellow in here. If I set the opacity down for my paint bucket tool to say 30, and by the way, a fast way to go in and change your opacity is not going up here and changing your opacity. It's simply this. With your paint bucket tool selected, go to your number on any number on your keypad and simply type that in. If you want 20%, just type in the number 2 and you're at 20%. 0 is going to be 100%. If you want 5%, that's 0.5. So I'm going to go back to 2, which is 20%. Now if I take my 20% yellow-green that I have and I click on these items, that's going to begin to add these colors to that in little 20% increments, okay? So I can kind of lighten or darken. If I come in here and I have a much darker color, like kind of this golden brown, I could come in here with my color, and remember I'm still set at 20% here, and then I could hit that, and that's going to take that color at 20% and kind of paint over this, okay? Kind of add to it. So I could do that also to kind of darken up certain things or just change the hue and or the saturation of something to just add a little bit different style to this. So that is a possibility right there. Now I turn off my painting. I can see that as well. And of course this is on its own layer. So what happens if I went in and I decided to lessen the opacity of that layer? and kind of screen that all back, give it a much softer look. I could certainly do that. Okay, that's kind of cool. If I wanted to do saturate the whole look massively, I'm going to duplicate this layer using my Command or Control J, and then I could go into my blending modes here in my layer panel, and I could go through and I could do very different modes here and just see what that new layer that I just created and clicked on can do with my craziness here. I know, fun stuff, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. So, and this part has nothing to do with the paint bucket tool, but we were here, so I thought I'd show you. Now, this is just one thing we can do with the paint bucket tool. We can also go in and fill a layer, fill anything that we click on as well. So I'm going to turn off these two layers and create a brand new layer here. If I have my paint bucket tool and I choose a color, I'm just going to choose a nice bright turquoise here. I'm going to put my opacity back at 100. I can fill this entire layer with my paint bucket tool. And the reason why is because there's no other layers that I'm using as reference. It's just a straight fill. If I then wanted to go in and create a selection on this layer, of course, use my paint bucket tool, and anything inside the selection is what is going to get filled because I can't go beyond the edge of the selection. So I could click here. I could also take a selection as well, and I could soften or feather that selection by using my select and mask. And I could soften or feather that right there and use my paint bucket tool to then, I'm going to choose a totally different color here, and I'm going to grab my paint bucket tool, which is the letter G, and fill that in with that soft fill. Now these are all being done on the same layer, but they could be on separate layers as well. So the paint bucket tool allows me to just simply click on and, based on my options here, fill whatever I want. If I have a selection, it's going to fill just the selection. But with my painting here, what I did is I used the background, basically the white areas, the contiguous pixels, as the place where I click, and then it would go into its edges, find the edges, and then fill. So you can do a lot of cool things with the paint bucket tool. It's really quite simple and easy, and it can be a lot of fun when you're doing something like this. But mainly, its purpose is to just be able to go in and select an area without having to do the magic wand tool, get the marching ants, fill it with a color, and then deselect. It basically does this all at once. So, hope you enjoyed that. That was the paint bucket tool.